Okay, everyone, we are live, and we'll do hello here with Gwendolyn Kiste. We're doing the soft start. We'll run this little video and come back to you. Okay, we're back here with Gwendolyn Kiste. This is the soft start for Underworld Dreams in Conversation. Gwendolyn and I will be talking about our newest books, Underworld Dreams and Boneset and Feathers, all marked up. But we'll give people a chance to get their seats, grab their popcorn, but won't maybe not share it with us if we've been eating too much popcorn.
I have. I just posted on social media about my birthday popcorn, and I'm very.
we should try to get. Yeah, you were mentioning like this is not a sponsored post, but like I've been trying to get like Carvel ice cream. Like I talk about Fudgy the Whale and Carvel ice cream, and like at one point somehow Carvel ice cream like chimed in on one of my tweets. I was like, KGB bar, 4th Avenue, New York, send over the Carvel. You know, that was the last I ever heard from any corporate entity. We're not ready for not ready. KGB bar, not ready for primetime advertising.
That's funny.
Right. So it's Gwendolyn and I were mentioning off camera just a minute ago. It's almost Women in Horror Month, which is something that around here we like. We're of the glass half full school. Like, hey, like things can always get better, and we sure hope they do. But why not? It's always Women in Horror Month. Why not an extra month of extra? So
yes.
It's okay to have other points of view. That's cool, but
yeah. I know. I never want to like try to convert people to my way of thinking. Some female authors are like, no, I don't like it, and I'm like, I understand it. Like I understand being like, no, we should really be celebrating it every month. Yeah, that's true.
That's true. Yeah, I'm like. Yeah. A reason to celebrate, and yeah, it's a good point. Like the whole point. Like we know nobody's fooling anyone. We know who has women in their events. We know who have women on their covers. We know who has and we know who doesn't. Like it's like Women in Horror Month isn't fooling anyone. But hey, why not convert to? I love celebrating stories and great stories, and why not celebrate? And it makes me happy to do so. So later on in the broadcast, you'll think you've got some events coming up. Some of them not announced, and some of them you'll be able to tell us about.
Yeah.
It's okay. So I think some people are getting their seats. I'm going to run our opening video one more time. We'll come back and we'll get started. Okay, welcome to Underworld Dreams in Conversation. I'm here with Gwendolyn Kiste, who is helping me kick off the audio book version of Underworld Dreams tonight. So we're going to have some conversation about Underworld Dreams. We're going to have some conversation about Gwendolyn's latest, Boneset and Feathers. We're going to do some readings and talk about our work and talk about all things strange. How are you tonight, Gwendolyn?
Good, good. How about you?
Doing good, doing good. Hello to everyone out there in the comments. We have somebody who asked if blueberries can count as popcorn, and the answer is yes. Blueberries count. Why not? So I'm gonna read Gwendolyn's biography and then turn it over to her. Gwendolyn Kiste is the Bram Stoker award-winning author of The Rust Maidens from Trepidatio Publishing, and Her Smile Will Untether the Universe from Journalstone, and the dark fantasy novella Pretty Marys all in a row from Broken Eye Books, who also did this one, Boneset and Feathers. Her short fiction has appeared in Nightmare magazine, Night Fires Come Join Us by the Fire, Black Static, Daily Science Fiction, Shimmer, Interzone, and Lamplight, among others. Originally from Ohio, she now resides on an abandoned horse farm outside Pittsburgh with her husband, 2 cats, and not nearly enough ghosts. Find her online at gwendolynKiste.com. Welcome, Gwendolyn.
Thank you. All right. Are you ready?
Yep, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Now I'm going to read your bio now.
Excellent.
All right. Daniel Braum is the author of the short story collections The Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales from Cemetery Dance ebooks in 2016, The Wish Mechanics, Stories of the Strange and Fantastic from Independent Legions in 2017, and the chapbook Yeti, Tiger, Dragon from Dim Shores in 2016. Underworld Dreams is his third collection and was released from Lethe Press in September 2020 and is now out as an audiobook. The Serpent Shadow, his first novella, was released from Cemetery Dance ebooks in July 2019. He is the editor of the Spirits Unwrapped anthology. His work has appeared in publications ranging from Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet to the Shivers 8 anthology. His most recent story appears in The Best Horror of the Year, Volume 12, edited by Ellen Datlow. He is the host of the Nighttime Logic series and the annual New York Ghost Story Festival. Yay! Those are all great things. Oh my gosh, looking through this, it's so great. Like the Nighttime Logic series and the Ghost Story Festival. I've gotten to be part of both of those.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, for those of you out there, if you want to tune in on this channel, hit subscribe, or just night one. Gwendolyn was our kickoff guest for the New York Ghost Story Festival. We got to hear about the invention of ghosts, which we might be hearing some more about tonight as well.
Yes. Yes. So let's start with the questions. So Underworld Dreams was just released as an audio book. Tell us both about the book and how the audiobook sounds.
Well, Underworld Dreams, it's my third short story collection. It's a book of what I call strange tales, where the supernatural element in most of the stories is intentionally unexplained. There's a lot of stories with intentional ambiguities in there. There's a lot of push and pull to whether is this supernatural or is this psychological. Yeah, the audiobook just came out about a month ago, and it's super fun. I've never had a full audiobook before. I've been lucky enough to be part of Pseudopod and Pod. Is it not Podcastle? Escape Pod, and they do a great job. They are such pros. Like they make you sound great. I've learned a lot from listening to my work on those, and I like to listen to it. So it's just I think wow, now I've forgotten the name of the narrator. I think his name is Jake Height or Jake Hitt, and he just does a great job. Does a great job. You can go on Amazon and there's a sample. You could hear it. So super happy about it.
Yeah, very cool. Very, very cool. So you refer to your stories as strange tales. Tell us more about what you mean by that term, and how does it relate to horror and weird fiction?
So when I say strange tales, I guess there's two levels of it. There's a surface level, like, okay, when you say strange tales or you say weird fiction, I think, right, there's, okay, it's just like literal. Yeah, it's strange and it's
Mm-hmm.
weird, and there's a certain atmosphere going on.
Mm-hmm.
The first book, The Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales, was intentionally named so uh, by my editor to link it up to the work of Robert Aickman. Robert Aickman, British author of Strange Tales. I think he coined the term for his fiction, which is really interstitial. It's really um, it's fiction without putting a name on it. It does just those things I was talking about. It's the speculative elements are unexplained. It
Mm-hmm.
could be a ghost. It could be a robot. And I'm making it very hard edged, but Aikman's work is not hard edged
No.
at all. So yeah, so when I say strange tales, it's to delineate that twilight zone, that
Mm-hmm.
dreamlike structure, harkening back to Robert Aickman. How does it relate to horror and weird fiction? Um, well, the one thing I could say for sure is that it does relate. That's the one thing, in that, like, right, horror is that, I guess it's horror is the one club that'll have me, or the one club that'll have us. Like, it's not fantasy, it's not
Mm-hmm.
science fiction, it is genre. And horror, I guess horror is, what's so wonderful about horror is, like, yeah, body horror, slasher horror, psychological horror, quiet horror. We
Mm-hmm.
love you all. So I mean that's the easy answer. I mean, I think it's fun to find all the ways it relates and the definitions. And my mind is just a little bit too soggy from quarantine to sound smart about talking about that.
Oh, that's great. I actually really like that idea about how horror is so encompassing of so many different experiences. I really like that. So,
I love that too. It was just it's one of those things that shouldn't be a surprise to me, but in back in the days when we used to interact with humans, that was one of the things that I was so surprised about, when people would come to tables where they're selling horror and people would be like, "Give me one of everything," or if they weren't give me one of everything, they were like, they were picking up some body horror and some slashers right
mm-hmm.
around the quiet horror, and they're like, "Wow, like these aren't Venn diagrams that are totally separate. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
these are flavors that you can enjoy." And it was
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. I even really like that within a story as well, not just within a
Yeah.
bookshelf.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, why strange tales in particular? Like, what is their appeal to you? I think we touched on this a little bit, but
Yeah, I love it. I love it as a writer because, I mean, I have my own personal journey with them. It was how I found my way and how I found my connection into
mm-hmm.
horror. I talk about that way too much. I will say, moving away from that, from a story point of view, what I love about Strange Tales is that it frees the story from not having to be about the supernatural baddie. And I love stories that are about the supernatural baddie. Like, okay, in vampire stories, if we're going with a vanilla vampire story and not a progressive thing, okay, we need a stake in the heart. We need to bury at the crossroads. And the stories, no matter how you bend and try,
Mm-hmm.
it's about those things.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a strange tale or something else, it's not about the rules of the supernatural or the ecology of the supernatural. And to me, as a writer, it frees a story where the supernatural or not supernatural to be a catalyst for the human story, and the stories wind up being humanist stories, and that's equally or even more exciting to me as a writer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that. All right, so let's talk about one of your stories in particular in the new collection. So, Rum Punch is going down. That one starts right away. I love it. It's the setting right away. Belize, 1986. Really strong choice. Like you're immediately grounded as a reader in this world. And I'm a big fan of historical fiction, especially historical horror that is relatively recent. That's in the 20th century. So it's like it's past. It is historical, but it's close enough that many of us have lived through it and can still remember this point. So what is it about that time period that you felt was a perfect setting for this story? And what research, if any, did you do in advance on this era?
Yeah, I was thinking about the question when I saw it, and my first reaction was like, okay, I'm old. I'm writing historical fiction now about stuff I've lived through. I'm old. But yeah, it's just one of those things that it shows what fiction can do. I write a lot about Belize. I write a lot about Central America in that time period, because that was a time period where I was a teenager in the 80s and I had my first encounters with it. So on the personal side, right, like this is where my personal connection and my personal inspiration is to it. So some of my earlier stories, stories that are set there, or stories that were even written a decade or two or more ago, there are places that have changed in just that time. So the story has something to it that is unintentional. I see it most in a story from my book, The Night Marchers, Hurricane Sandrine. It's very setting heavy about this one place. And that was already 20 years ago. And that place has moved on. That place is not the same. So suddenly I'm like, just for me, when I read that story, it's a way to revisit it. And I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, that really became historical fiction. Like, right. So I guess it's one of those obvious things, duh. But yeah, it kind of hit me when you asked this question. Yeah. Why did I pick it for that story? I think maybe I was more aware of it. One of the recurring themes I do like to write about are places in change, or places that are going to be something, or may or may not. And even though that was not the theme of Rum Punch going down, I think it was sort of the background radiation of the magic or supernatural. Like it's a very subtle story about whether anything supernatural is it such a story about, is it misperception or is it supernatural? So the background, maybe the speculative element is maybe in the background of like maybe it's the power of this place that explains what you just read. And Belize 1986 for me it embodied that. So I guess one other Easter egg, I think I've mentioned this Easter egg, is an author that is relatively new to me, is James Tiptree Jr., aka Alice Sheldon. And in their Quintana Roo stories, which are 3, possibly 4 stories, it's set right on the Belize-Mexico border, right around the same time. And I kind of missed Tiptree by a couple of years, but one of the very formative things for me about that area was I saw it clear cut. It was something very striking to me. And in those stories, in the background, are these trucks that are clear cutting the area. So it's very my Easter eggs of how of fitting in, of linking those stories to Tiptree and Tiptree's stories was just my own personal reasons of just like, why do we write? I'm like, yeah, my works, it's all just Tiptree fan fiction. That's all.
That's great. So also in Rum Punch going down, there's recurring images of seahorses. And I love it because they're at once very enchanting, but they're also kind of unnerving. And they're such beautiful creatures and kind of underused in fiction. When I was reading the story, I realized like I don't see a lot of seahorses in weird fiction or in horror. But the seahorses also capture like a really deep sense of like melancholy and foreboding. So what was it that drew you to the symbolism of the seahorses and Rum Punches going down? And have you ever seen seahorses in the wild yourself, or is it something you dreamed of doing like your protagonist?
Oh, I'm always dreaming of fish. I mean, I don't have any seahorses, but fishes are in the background there. But the seahorses weren't something I was consciously picking as a symbol. I think it was just it was a literal plot point. But that you mentioned it, yeah, animals are always right for symbolism, and that is something I do often do, or I like to do it. And yeah, there's something just so interesting about seahorses, right? Like they're ripe for symbolism. I'm not sure if it works symbolically in the story, but they are weak swimmers. They're such weak swimmers. They just have these tiny little fins, and like they could, right? They could barely get across from one part of the tank to each other, right? Like they have that strong tail. They hold on to whatever they're holding on to, and yeah, in the story they're in a very strong ocean channel, and so yeah, I'm not sure what the symbolism is there, but it was just something very very appealing to write about. Yeah, I wish I had something smarter to say. I'm just like, that is the answer to that is the nighttime logic, and that's what makes a strange tale. But I'm like, I like the fish is my answer.
I like that though, because I think that's a fun thing as a writer, to just get the opportunity to write about something that you love or find interesting and just incorporating it. That's something that, like, sometimes I get too swept away in this idea of like, oh, it's got to mean something. But then I'm like, sometimes it's just fun. And sometimes everybody brings their own, ideas to it. So for one person, the seahorses might symbolize one thing, and to somebody else, it's going to be something totally different. So.
Yeah,
So have you seen them in the wild? Have you ever seen seahorses in the wild?
I have. I've been lucky enough to see it. Yeah, and it's also something inherent. I don't name it. It also sort of brings up a moral issue. I don't name the island where Rum Punch is going down is happening. It's not really a secret. If you read my work, you could pretty much figure it out. But that aspect of the story is true. Is that is one of the places where the seahorses are, and I'd been going there for at least a decade before I even knew about it, before you're even trusted or you find out about it, because it's yeah, it's easy to F that stuff up, and I like it that's a great thing about Belize, great thing about Costa Rica as well, great thing about countries who consciously and make an organized effort to protect and value their natural resources, and that just makes me so happy. I know you've been involved in the charitable chapbook thing. I haven't directly, but I was inspired by that when I got my check for from Nightscape Press for Knox Pareidolia. I made a donation to Oceana Belize, just in just the way that model inspires me, for sure.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Yay, seahorses. Yay. All right. So next question. Memory and the passage of time and a longing for what came before are often pivotal themes in your stories. And there's also a sense of like time loops, or of the world repeating itself as your narrator observes in the story. And so what is it about the past and memory that appeal to you as a writer? And do you think that people can often break out of their own personal loops and habits, or do you think that most of us stay in those same places, sort of destined to repeat ourselves in the past?
Yeah, at first I was like, I don't write about memory and time. And then I'm like, the story I've been working on all month, and then I was working on before this, I'm like, oh God, it's about memory and time. It's about the passage of time. And I mean, the story I'm working on now is a little bit different in that a lot of times my stories take place in a compact period of time. And this one I'm working on now, I'm trying to make it over a large period of time while still being in a short story. So I'm like, yeah, I guess if the shoe fits on that one. I think the answer to that, at least for me, is it goes a lot to the internal conflicts. I mean, I like to have strong genre plots with external conflicts, but I like to make sure my characters have really strong internal stakes as well, and that just seems to be that seems to go with it. I don't know the answer. Are we destined, quote unquote, to repeat things? I think just in terminology, the term, destiny is potentially like an oppressive thing, like the hand of fate or destiny, big D. So I really like just in life, I like I like the self-determination, self-responsibility. And I guess it goes to my answer of your question is like, I don't know if people are destined to do it, but I just know, at least in myself, any change that I try to make or that I have made or that I failed in, it takes a shitload of focus and energy. So, and that's conflict, and that makes great stories. So, it's not really a clear answer on that, but that's the soup.
Yeah, I actually really like that, because I think in my work, I find that my characters are often stuck in loops as well, and that may have been why I picked it out of your work. And I feel the same way. I feel like it's really, really, really hard to break out of it, but I think that people can. And I think, again, that's the conflict, and that's what, if you're wanting to bring that stuff, you bring that to it, because it's like breaking out of it is definitely not easy, but, we can't be too nice to our characters, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's one of the things I love about your stories is you do a wonderful job of depicting both of those things, of having these fun, velocity, plot-driven external conflicts, yet you always know with your characters what's tearing up the people inside, especially in Boneset and Feathers. So, I love that, and it's also very forward in your work. So that's just one of the things I really like about your writing as well, is that aspect.
Well, the next question really is, I've read and enjoyed so many of your stories in the past, and that is true, but I love that actually is a perfect follow-up to what you just said. And something else I've noticed, beyond like the memory and passage of time, is the recurring theme of water. And so what draws you to using water as a way to explore horror and the weird? And do you have some perennial favorite horror films or stories set at beaches or along the ocean?
Yeah, I guess that's another one of those questions where, when I was putting together Underworld Dreams, that it came together. And I'll show the cover. I mean, Steve Berman at Leve and Saban Anderson, they just did this wonderful cover. I think you could sort of see that man out there in the waves. And right, that's one of those things where I wish I could sound smart and be like, well, the way I did it was, but I guess that's one of the great things about writing, when you put them together and you look back, and you're like, yeah, you write a lot about water. I'm like, yeah, I guess I do. I don't have an answer to it, but I'm also okay with not having an answer to it. Like, if it works, like I like that. I can talk more about setting and some specific settings, but it wasn't intentional. I was trying to pick, I'm like, do I have favorite water works or water movies? And the only one that sprung to mind was Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now, which are two favorites of mine. They're hardly water, I guess, because they're on a river. It's water, but it's not really the vibe of these. A lot of the things in Underworld Dreams, if you're out there and you haven't read it, there are a lot of beach town, or I hate the word third world, but edge places that are not of modern. They're in the here and now, but it's not. We're definitely not in New York City, Dorothy, that kind of thing there. So.
Yeah. All right, so you are going to read a bit from one of your stories from Underworld Dreams, Polankar, one that is set by the water. So
yeah, this is a water story. I'm going to try something different, and then it's going to be pretty short, maybe only about 10 minutes, and I'm not going to read from the beginning. I'm just going to go read just a middle bit from it. So, I mean, to set it up, Polankar is a short story. There's the protagonist. He has gone to Central America chasing down his wayward brother, Stephen, who has just given up on life, given up on his family. And our narrator is there to just bring Stephen back to us. And he hopes to do that by recreating this dive trip that they did as children. So let's see if I figure out how to do a solo screen, and I'll read a little bit from Paul and Carr. Okay, great. Yeah, here's a bit from Paul and Carr. Uncle Jake, did you find Daddy yet? Becca asks. Her young voice sounds like it's right here, not 1,000 miles away. No, not yet, sweetie, I say. Soon. Real soon now. I really hope so, she says. I hear the sounds of home and 4-year-old Avi saying, Daddy, Daddy, and something about fireflies in the background. Since Stephen left, the kids live part of the time with me and Elle, and part of the time with Mom. I'll call you tomorrow, sweetness, I say, hopefully with good news. Jacob, the kids really want you to come home. It's Elle. And I don't have to tell you, I do too, she says. Soon, I say. I just want to try one more thing. It's always one more thing, she says. It's time to stop. How long are you going to chase him for? I'm sorry. If he doesn't want to come home, he's not going to. Nothing you can do will change that. Listen, I got to go. We're about to dive. No, the accountant called again, and we have to decide what we're going to do about the roof at your mom's house. I can't talk now, I say. I love you. You'll see. I'll bring him home. No, you won't, Stephen says, loud enough for her to hear. Elle hangs up. Mara sticks her finger in her mouth to mock me. You stop, Stephen says to her. That's great, I say. Your kids are home crying for their father. I bring you here to honor your father, and you bring this worthless smartass along? You can shut up too, he says. She's a better diver than both of us. And I said I'd go on your little adventure, but I didn't say I wanted to dive. To die? What are you doing? I say. Why are you doing this? Why don't you just come home? You really don't know anything, do you? He says. Can we just dive? I should have never picked up the phone. The whole situation is impossible. But like Dad always said, life is dealing with impossible situations, finding our way through them. Somewhere along the line, Stephen forgot this. I dive first. Antonio, Mara, and Stephen circle above me as we descend. The air bubbles distort in the sunlight as they float to the surface. We sink, letting air out of our vests to control our descent, inching down, down, down. The water grows colder and then chilly as we hit the thermocline. By the time we reach our first safety stop at 60 feet, the sun is another world away. Stopping on the way down is to get acclimated, but going up, it is a matter of life or death. Go up too fast, and nitrogen bubbles can form in the blood, which will kill you. Antonio looks at his big dive watch, monitoring the time before we can proceed. On our trip with Dad, Stephen and I did this, but we didn't understand. We had no training. We went through the motions of decompression dive safety and made it through by sheer blind luck. It wasn't until years later when I took my first dive course did I realize what we had done and the risks we had taken. I see the top of the reef 20 feet beneath us. It's teeming with life. A sea turtle rises from the coral and glides past on its way to the surface. Visibility is perfect in all directions. In the distance, a giant ray sails through the water like a bat through air. We float motionless. Everyone's buoyancy looks good. Amara points at the ray for Stephen. Antonio signals. We let air out of our vests and sink. and we descend into a giant school of fish. Tens of thousands of silver bodies surround us, silver scales glinting in the sunlight that is managed to reach. We emerge from the school at the side of a wall of coral taller than a skyscraper, the Palancar Reef, a living megalith that goes on as far as I can see. To my right, there is only coral. To my left, the abyss, the continental shelf. A few long rays of light struggle down the slope through water, every gradient of blue. They fail to penetrate to the dark violet layer, the last color before the black. The chasm is unfathomable. Losing buoyancy here means being swallowed and lost forever. I realize I'm sucking air too fast and try to calm myself. I breathe deep and slow and let myself drift. The current is strong. It carries us along the wall, immersing us in the activity going on all around us. A pink and blue and green parrotfish nips at a coral head, then disappears into a small cave. It emerges a second later, chased by a green moray snapping its jaws. All the caves are occupied. Lobster, scorpionfish, damsels and angels and butterfly fish of every color. Mara points up. A reef shark noses around the coral above us. I'm not afraid of it. It is the abyss that worries me. I don't look. I focus on the wall. It is everything I remembered. Coral, fish, big robust morays, half out of their caves, floating in the current like ribbons. It is magic. The current has carried Mara further away than I'd like. I can still see Antonio, but he is also too far away from comfort. I kick with my fins and swim towards them. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Stephen below me. It looks like he is messing with his vest. I kick against the current to halt myself and look. He unbuckles the snap securing his tank. It floats above his head, tethered to him by only his airline. A tendril of blood unfurls from his hand. Why the hell is he taking off his gear? A green moray snakes out of a cave in front of him. It is giant, 10 feet long, maybe more. Is it growing? It snaps its jaws, and I see its face is all wrong. It's not a fish, it's something horrible. It loses its eel shape and becomes a mess of intestines and limbs undulating in the current before Stephen. I roll and kick towards him. I see two mirror images of my brother, one with gear and a wetsuit, one naked. Whatever it it has taken Stephen's shape. Naked Stephen unhooks wetsuit Stephen's gear and puts it on. He kicks and rises out of view. My Stephen, my brother, is floating there without gear, without air. I kick harder to reach him. He sinks. I swim as hard as I can. I realize I'm not thinking about an emergency ascent and buddy breathing like I know I should be. My mind drifts to thoughts of taking off my gear and joining him. He is a perfect form framed in dark blue. I envision myself next to him, sinking with him, nearing the black until we are surrounded by it, until we are one with it. I pull off my mask. The purples and blues blur at the darkness. Everything Stephen has done makes sense now. I get it. I reach for him. I want to feel his hand in mine. I take my left glove off. My right one sticks as I try to peel it. I let air out of my buoyancy vest and slowly sink. I slip my feet out of my fins. I'm coming, I yell. My regulator is out. My mouth fills with water. Something grabs me around my waist. I feel my weight belt drop. My buoyancy vest fills with air. Instead of sinking, I am rising. My ears pop. I hear hissing air. All the colors fade to gray. Then there is only quiet, and darkness. So that's a little bit from Paul and Paul there. Just the dive section of the story.
Very good. Very cool.
Yeah, so which brings us to the next part of our show. I will be asking. It's a good thing I'm not a host of like a television show, because our sponsor, Carvel Ice Cream and Special Popcorn, would be like, be more entertaining, Brahm, do a dance. But the next part of our show, I get to talk with Gwendolyn about Boneset and Feathers. So yeah, it's your latest novel, which is out now from Broken Eye Books. Yeah, just tell people who haven't checked it out yet about the new book. What's it about?
So it's a witchcraft book. I feel like I always wanted to like write about witches in like a longer form. So I'm like calling this my witchcraft book, as though it'll be the only one. Who knows? But like right now, I at least have this one because I love witchcraft. I love witches. And I think so often they're depicted so negatively, and it's always that the women are evil or the witches are evil. So I really wanted to do something that, was much more about witches and witch finders and witch hunts. And, the story opens and the main character, Odette, is the only witch left in her village. All the rest of the witches have either been burned or been driven out. And so she's sort of this pariah because she's the only witch left, and they kind of blame her for what's happened, and they're worried that the town is worried that the witch finders will come back. And the story opens, and what I will be reading in a little bit is the opening where birds start falling from the sky, and it's sort of this moment where the witch, she's been trying to kind of suppress her witchcraft for a long time, and now the witchcraft is just sort of coming back to the town, whether they like it or not. So yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you're going to read from the opening then, because otherwise I was going to it's got such a great opening, but we're going to hear it in a little bit then. So yeah, and I'll keep my questions spoiler free as best that I can. Not as best as I can, I will keep them spoiler free. One of the cool things about, right, yeah, this is a book about witches and magic and witch finders, but one of the cool things is the depictions of magic, and it's, I guess, what I call, or people call, magic with consequences. It's not just like a wave of a magic wand or a wave of the hand. It's spells they're not free and they're not easy. So yeah, if you could tell us about how you came to portray the magic that way, and how does it work into the story?
Yeah. So the way I look at it is, a lot of people don't believe in witchcraft. I like the idea of believing in witchcraft. I like the idea of believing in ghosts. To me, it makes the world more interesting. But when I start thinking about, okay, if this is real, if witchcraft is real, how would it work? And so often we know, like, nothing is free. You've got to work for things. Things have costs. Everything has consequences. And it's fine. Plenty of stories have done a great job of having, consequence-free magic that you can just, I loved Bewitch as a kid. And that's, even though she gets herself in trouble mostly because she's not allowed to do witchcraft. But, she could just, do that little thing with her nose and things would happen. But when I was thinking, especially in horror, you want there to be these kind of consequences. And I really wanted to think, especially for someone like Odette, the main character, that witchcraft, while it's been something that's been at times nourishing in her life, it's also taken a really huge toll on her. So thinking about doing spells in that way of there being consequences, and she gets really exhausted after she does these spells. Like it's physically exhausting. And in some ways, it's almost like when we write, right? Because as writers, I think very often, at least for me, if I finish a story, I might be a little bit buzzed from it, but I'm also really exhausted. And there's almost like this time, and I see a lot of other writers talk about this on social media. You finish a project, you finish a story, you're really tired afterwards. You're worn out. And it's sometimes almost like you can't even write anything for a day or so, or maybe longer, because the proverbial well is dry. And so in some ways, this was also my way of maybe talking a little bit about how it feels to be a writer and to create something like that. Because I always like to think that writing is its own form of magic and witchcraft, because where does creativity come from? I mean, it seems kind of witchy all by itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, now we're in danger of being whatever, to write a cliche, but the spark of inspiration is something we can talk till the cows come home about craft and our process and the art of it, but what is inspiration? What is that magic to it?
Yeah.
And it's just so it just makes for interesting fiction. I mean, yeah, right. Like there is interesting fiction that with magic without consequences, but having something be with a cost and not just be like having right, like a hero be like Superman or someone with where it's unendless power. I think it becomes harder to make something interesting as well.
Yeah.
But right, you talked about the cost that this takes on Odette, our main character, who is a witch. I'll read a couple. I wanted to just read a couple of lines, not from chapter 1, because even though this is it's a story, whether we call it what genre we want to put it in, horror, is it dark fantasy, is it this kind of horror, is it that kind of horror? The best genre stories also, I think, are saying something about now. And Odette is always having a running commentary about what's happening. Like there's a line when she's thinking about, or she's observing the witch finders, and the observation is, men like them never know when to stop. Right, and she's got all these choice, really just hyper focused. Right, as to the magic and consequences, like she's talking about it, and she's like, it left me in bed for a week, a sharp ache in my bones, right down to the marrow, heavy as a stone. Right, so it's just not. It's never easy. What's the other one that I have here? Yeah. I think I'm too old now to be a maiden, too young to be a crone, never wanted to be a mother. There's no place in the world for a woman like me. Even if I wasn't a witch, the villagers wouldn't know what to do with me. So, yeah, if you could tell me, like, with those lines in mind, like, what is it tell me about the portrayal of Odette as a witch, both in this book, and what parallels, if any, are there to any other things or any other situations?
I do. I have to first comment on the last line, the maiden mother crone line, because I remember so clearly where I was when I wrote that. I was sitting in my car and I was outside of this event at a place called Phipps in Pittsburgh, and it's like got a bunch of like flowers and things like that, and it was for a David Bowie event, and it was 1 week before everybody went to quarantine. It was the absolute last time I've been out to do an event. And I remember it was like the gathering dark, and I've got like this piece of paper, and I'm like coming up with that line in the dark, and I like, when I got it home, I can barely read it. But like when you're saying that, I'm like, oh, I can remember where I was, because sometimes with certain lines, I'm like, I don't know. I can't tell you why I even wrote that, but that one I remember so clearly, and it's so vivid, especially because it was the last time to get out into the world. So I love that you picked that one, because that just totally brought back that memory for me.
Yeah, sometimes those lines, those really energetic lines, they really reach your readers.
Well, I'm glad that that very strange moment, as it was like getting really dark out, like I'm glad that worked out. You never know what ones are going to work out, right? As a writer, sometimes you're like,
you never do.
So for me, like really talking about what it means to be a witch in this book, it really is about her trying to find her place. And like you said, to being a woman in today's world, it's still, and we're talking about with Women in Horror Month, we want to believe that things are getting better. And I think that they very much are, but at other times, sometimes it feels like it's a step forward, then a step back, then maybe 2 steps forward, then a step back. And for her, it's really about figuring out where she fits and what her power is, and how to use that power, in a way that is good, and for her and good for the world. She doesn't want to use power in an abusive way. And that's something I think about a lot, is that a lot of times powerful people are abusive. Like that's just a thing that happens a lot. So I definitely didn't want, I wanted to explore what it meant for someone to be a witch and to have power and not use it in an abusive way and really grapple with that. So yeah.
A lot of or a few of my favorite films with interesting portrayals of witches come to mind. Some recent favorites with witches and witchcraft were The Neon Demon. I'm new to Argento, and Argento is a Suspiria 77 and the new one. We have A24 Studios movies of which. What do you, I know you love film. Any of those? Good, bad, ugly, indifferent?
I like The Witch. I like it, but it is still, she's a very bad witch in it. She's a very traditionally bad witch. So I'm always like, but I love a lot of things about it.
Bad as in she's bad at being a witch, or she is
she's bad. Like she's like the witch that I always feel like the witch of the title. Now you could argue, spoiler for this movie, hopefully nobody cares, it's a few years old. I mean, Thomas is the witch by the end. So I mean, you don't know whether which witch we're talking about, I guess, in the title. Are we talking about her, or are we talking about the witch that's like living in the forest at the beginning that like gets the baby and everything? I love the ending of The Witch. I love the idea of taking that power, that she felt so powerless in the village. I did like that, even though I didn't like the whole idea of it having to be given to her by the male. Though Black Phillip as the goat is like the greatest, and the little kids are so creepy. Those little kids are great, because some like kids are very hit or miss in movies, but like when the kids are good in movies, they're usually great and they're very memorable. And those two kids were really creepy, and then they sing that weird little song and they would skip around. They were really fun.
Oh yeah, I love that movie. Yeah, I like to not think of it as Black Phillip as maybe granting the power. Like, let's just call him the mascot, like with the great catch line, you know?
Okay.
Like, right? I mean,
I like that.
You know, I mean, he's just like, you know, like he's just the spokesgoat for witchery, right? I mean, you know, granted, he probably is Satan. Then, all right, so maybe the witches are getting their power from Satan, but we can. I didn't think about it that way until you mentioned it, and I can't deny it. But it is a really powerful ending of like,
yes.
There's just so much misogyny in that movie. It's just so. It's like so painful, and so it's like it was like a palpable. It was just such a palpable relief, and you're just like, of course, she's gonna be a witch. Like, you know, like it makes you sympathy. You know.
Oh yeah.
Of course, you look. You know, it's rare. I think it's rare that film can do that. So yeah, that's why I really like that. I really like that film, and stories like that in Boneset and Feathers where you're doing that. We talked about animals. Animals, goats. We didn't talk about goats, but yeah, another impromptu good use of animal in a movie. A black, we'll give the Black Phillip love all day long. But birds play a big part in the story, which we're going to hear from in just a bit. I noticed the charity that you chose for your charitable chapbook from Nightscape Press was the National Aviary. I think that was, is that for Invention of Ghosts that was linked?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, if you could tell us why you chose that charity, and you're going to read from. I was going to ask you what role the birds played in the story, but I know we're gonna see it in just a bit too.
Yeah. So I love the National Aviary. It's in Pittsburgh, and it's the only like national aviary. It's the only one sort of like there's not a lot of aviaries, I guess. It's one of those things that when you're close to something, you kind of almost take it for granted. And like when I first came to the Pittsburgh area, I didn't realize that there weren't that many aviaries. And then I love so much of the work they're doing there. They do so much with conservation, and they do so much with, you know, raising raising the birds, and my husband and I have gotten to go and actually meet some of the baby birds before, and like hold little baby owls. Like we've gotten to hold like a burrow owl that was tiny, and then like the bigger like Eurasian eagle owls, they get really big, really, like you can't tell here, but they're like really big. They're so big. See, they're so big you can't even see it on the screen. But like even when they're babies, they're fairly large, and it's just like they do such great work there, and it's just. And they do so much with the community and everything. So it was just really, really exciting to be able to have that money donated to them. And so, yeah, like I love birds. I think they're great. Like I love animals in general. I think they're so fascinating. I think sometimes when we get like down about people, it can be like, yay, animals, let's celebrate animals. And so, you know, that's why I love the underwater themes in your work and the fish and everything. Cause it's like, I love fish too. They're like so fascinating. And they're so beautiful. And I couldn't see it until you went to your full screen and your aquarium in the background. And it's so pretty. And like they're like great. They're like your supporting cast back there, like floating behind you. They're so cool. And yeah, and I just love birds, and we have a lot of birds that come to our backyard, and we also have a lot of feral cats. So the feral cats try to get the poor birds. Like we have this really cute little feral cat outside, but she's trying to eat the birds. And then today we had a falcon that like nestled in the top because it wanted to eat the cardinals, and all the cardinals flew away. So it's like, yeah, I'm like, run, cardinals, run. There's a lot of birds in our backyard, so that's like a nice thing in quarantine, provided they're all safe and no birds have been harmed lately. And I'm like, I go out there terrified I'm going to see a bunch of feathers somewhere. Like I saw one, and my husband's like, no, that's just like a regular feather they lost. I'm like, okay, although he may have just be making me feel better. Maybe like he knows, and he's, oh, that bird was fine.
Nature is beautiful and fascinating, but it is cold and uncaring. I mean, you just reminded me of feeding. I feed the birds during quarantine. It's a new thing for me, feeding the birds. And I'm in the suburbs, but it's near enough that I notice when it storms or when it snows, we have a lot of red-tailed hawks that are unable to, I guess, like hunt their normal thing. And that's when they'll come into the burbs and pick off birds. So every now and then, like, I'll wake up and it's always on a white sheet of snow, and it's like it's a little scene of bloody murder where like a hawk has just eviscerated a neighborhood. Sometimes they'll bring a seagull and whatever and just drop it there. I'm just like, what the F is this? And I'm like, the first time I'm like, is someone playing a joke? You know, and then like it was like the next time I'm like, nope, that's a red tail eating a seagull in my backyard, making a mess. And you know, but
yeah, nature is so cool. And that's something, because like you said in my bio, we live on an abandoned horse farm, and so it's like 30 acres, and you know that it's great and it's beautiful so much of the time. And then it's like sometimes you'll just find a piece of something, or there'll be some blood, and you just kind of have to fill in the blanks, and you're like, oh. Yeah. Before I was living here with my husband, he once just found a woodchuck leg. That was all he found. We probably coyote, maybe, we don't know. It's like, oh, that's terrible. So yeah, I always do think it's funny, people who maybe have never really spent much time in nature and they only like watch it on documentaries, and they're like, it's so beautiful, and that's like their whole take on it. And I'm like, it is beautiful. It's not that that's not true, but it's also really mean, and it really is survival of the fittest out there. And like, it can be intense.
Yeah, I have a niece and nephew. You know, they're teenage and young 20s, and they just moved part of the time upstate, which is somewhere that I'm lucky enough I grew up upstate, so I'm familiar with snakes and bears and things. And I'm like, yeah, you know, it's like, it's beautiful, run. You know, it's like, you know, trying to teach them safety of just like, you know, like, and that, you know, they're showing me you know, cell phone video of like a snake, and I'm like, this is how you die, you know, and chasing the bear on the security camera. I'm like, yeah, you know, like, no, you must clean up after the party, clean up. Bears, beautiful, big strong paws. But moving back to Bone, before you read in Boneset and Feathers, I have one or two more questions. It strikes me that the outsider is outsiders are a recurring theme, in your work, and yeah, you explore that in your stories to great success. How is Odette an outsider in this one?
You know, it's mostly that she is the last witch in her village. You know, they've all been driven out, or they've all stopped doing witchcraft, or they've been burned, and so she's actually even moved at the beginning of the story where we're coming in at. She's even moved into the forest, out of the village and into the forest, where she's just trying to stay away from everybody as much as she possibly can, because it's just like she's even physically outside of the community, because the witchcraft has become what she sees and what the village sees as such a liability. And then that becomes something that she has very much internalized as being like, this is something that's made, you know, so many people's lives so bad, and is really trying to keep herself outside of that village. But then obviously, as the story starts to get kind of pulled back in as it goes along.
Okay, so we're gonna hear now from Boneset and Feathers. You're gonna read. You're gonna give us all of chapter 1, or are you gonna just read from chapter?
You know, I'm gonna see how long it takes, and
all
then
right.
maybe if it's not done, I'll finish it up in the second
All right.
the second.
All right, just give me just give me a heads up when you're closing up. And here's Gwendolyn Kiste reading from Boneset and Feathers. Oh, that's me. That is not Gwendolyn Kiste. Let's go back. Let's try that. Let's try that again. How are we gonna do this?
It'll be fine if you stay on.
Oh, yeah, okay.
There I am.
There you are.
All right. All right, so like I said, we're just going to come in right at the very, very beginning of chapter 1. When the first crows fall from the sky, the villagers know I'm to blame. It doesn't take much to guess that it's me, the witch that lives outside of town, the only witch left here. Soon, if the witchfinders keep building their pyres across the countryside, I might be the only witch left anywhere. Then I'll be the one blamed for everything. A failed harvest, a sour real estate deal, an infant with colic. There will be no ill I can't be punished for. But even as feathers clog up the villagers' chimneys and talons scrape across the stained glass windows of the church, I'm none the wiser to it. It's not until I'm halfway to town that I see a crow tumble out of the clouds. At first, I'm sure it's only my eyes playing tricks on me again, a mirage dancing alongside the demons and ghosts that have been pinwheeling at the edges of my vision for years. So I ignore the harbinger and keep going until it's too late to easily turn back. By the time the crow is joined by starlings and bluebirds and cardinals, all the colors banding across the slate gray sky of February like a deranged aurora borealis, I'm already at the crossroads, halfway between everywhere and nowhere. With 4 directions to go, and none of them very welcoming, I have only bad choices. North, toward a place I hope never to visit, the capital city, that will burn any witch they can get a hold of. Off the beaten path toward the east and into the highland forest with its ancient phantoms and toadstool circles. I can't help but shudder. These days, some land is too haunted, even for a witch. South, toward my Spartan cottage, back the way I came, into the quieter woods where I dwell, where one day, if I'm lucky, I'll die alone. If I'm not lucky, I'll die the same way as the others, among flame and straw and screams that go unanswered. Or I could grit my teeth and go to the place I've been heading all along ever since I set out at sunrise this morning, west into a town that doesn't want a witch, but is cursed with me anyhow. The trees murmur all around me, and I hold perfectly still at the crossroads, already knowing what I should do. Turn and race back home as fast as I can, anything to escape this place and these birds. But I only shake my head. That won't work either. After all, if I ran every time I was scared, I'd never stop running. 2 things. That's all I need in the village. Then I might make it until spring thaw. I clasp my hands in front of me and walk on toward the village. When I reach the town square, the birds are still falling, and there's no one on the street. They're all hiding inside. Families gather at their front windows, sobbing at the sky, glaring at me as I pass. I tip my head to the ground, a scream blossoming in my throat. I didn't do this, I want to tell them. And it's mostly true. This isn't from a spell I cast, but I know they blame me anyhow. They believe my magic has run wild from this grief I can't contain. The same grief the villagers live with, too. They have to see the evidence of it every day in the town square where the ground is still charred black from the pyres. It seems no matter how many rainstorms we get, nothing will wash this town clean again. It's been 5 years since the witchfinders were here, but they more than left their mark. Whenever you were in the village, you'd know when those men from the capital arrived, their cloaks so thick and billowy they seemed to cover all the rooftops, their boots perfectly polished so that when they loomed over you, you couldn't even look down to escape. You'd only see yourself reflected back in the accusing leather sheen. They roamed our streets day and night, taking notes in their ledgers, arresting without warrant, shooting our wrens and cardinals and robins out of the sky until they'd chased them all away. Thanks to those men, no one had seen a single bird in this village for 5 years. That is, until today. Now the birds cascade around me, and I freeze up in the middle of the street, still wanting to flee back to the forest. The copper rooftop on the corner glimmers in the sun, and I realize I'm already here. The general store, my first stop. The heavy wooden door swings open in my hand, and I slip inside, only to discover it's no safer. What I need is in the back of the store, but that's where everyone else is, too. Huddled together, tangled up in a human rat king, a smattering of patrons cowering as far from the front windows and the carnage as they can get. I halt in the aisle, only a few paces away as they stare at me. Why is she doing this? They mumble to each other, their skin wan, their eyes swirling dark. I stay put, not wanting to spook them. If I move too quickly, they might panic en masse, and things will get so much worse. Are you open? I say, and someone lets out a strident laugh. It's the clerk, half hidden in the far back. Why bother asking, she says. You'll do whatever you want anyway. My throat constricts, and I want to tell her how that isn't true, but it won't matter. I might not have done this on purpose, but they'll never believe that, because they never believe me. The clerk slides out from behind the counter, pushing to the front of the crowd. She looks right at me, and I recognize her from years ago, from a different life where I used to teach her and the other girls our age a bit of my hand-me-down magic. How to conjure a glamour, how to see the face of your true love in the runny whites of an egg. I wanted to teach them more. I wanted to teach them everything. But all the parents found out first, and that was that. Mothers and fathers always put a stop to things they don't understand. Why do you want to help those girls? My own mother asked me when she caught me in the forest with them, a ring of salt around us. Because they're my friends, I said, and she flashed me a cruel smile that could have stopped time. Wait until you need them, she said. Wait and see how fast they run. Above us, a bird thuds against the roof, and another after that, and the clerk edges closer to me, her jaw set. Take whatever you need, she says, her voice sharp and cold as chiseled iron. My head down, I move past the bins of coffee and sugar and spiced tobacco. The aisles are cramped and grimy, and the others watch me as I pass, inching back several steps, terrified they might accidentally brush against me. She looks worse, they whisper, and I know they're right. Since the last time I was here in the fall, I've been wasting away, bit by bit. Acorn flour, roasted pine bark, bits of crystallized honey. There isn't much left in my cupboard this time of year, which means there isn't much left of me. But I never come to the village and ask for a meal. I don't trust what they'd put in my food. The clerk is the only one who comes closer, matching me step for step, tracking me whatever aisle I choose. I breathe in, not remembering what to call her. I used to know her name. I used to know all the girls' names, but like everything about this village, I've done my best to forget. It's easier that way, pretending I never knew her at all. As I push to the end of the aisle, she drifts one step nearer, cornering me between dusty bins of marjoram and cardamom and cayenne. Why do you keep doing this? The question simmers on her lips, her breath hot and sweet like candied cinnamon. Why don't you stay gone? She glares right through me, her mouth twisted. I'm sure she's about to scream or spit at me, but then something in her shifts, her face going dark. Please, Odette, she says, her eyes glistening. Thin tears streaking down her cheeks. Haven't we lost enough already? As if I'm to blame for all this loss, instead of the witch-finders. She thinks it's so simple, all the villagers do, that if I stop doing magic, we'll be safe and the witch-finders will forget about us. What no one understands is that I have tried. Every night I turn away from the dark and do my best to forget. My mind going gray as I erase the spells I memorized as a child, the intricate rituals my mother taught me, those words that can carry the weight of the world in only a few syllables. Over and over, I practice being someone else, since being me has done no good. Except the truth has a terrible tendency of leaking in at the edges. You can only hide from yourself for so long. On the bottom shelf, I finally spot it, an overstuffed satchel of salt. First item off my list. and one step closer to escaping this town. I reach out for it, but instantly a sharp murmur jolts through the whole store. Your hands, the clerk says, and dread clenches in my guts because I see it too. My fingernails are caked thick with dirt. She's been digging in the cemetery again, the others whisper, and they're right. I'd hoped it was only a bad dream, but these scratches on my palms are real too, from the rusted coffin nails biting into my skin. I was really there last night among the tombs of the other witches, the tombs of my family. The front windows bow inwards, and another crow cascades past the front awning. My head spins as I carry the salt to the counter, clasping it close to my chest to keep my hands from trembling, all this power bubbling up inside me. The clerk doesn't bother to meet me. With graveyard dirt on my hands, nobody will come near me now. So I drop my coins on the counter, 2 pence too many. At least that way, no one can call me a thief. Back on the street, I dodge down an alley, away from the villagers' prying eyes. A sparrow topples to the cobblestone next to me, followed by a robin and a starling. Together, they look so unreal, their eyes glazed, their bodies still. All the birds are silent. Even as they fall, they make no sound. I bury my face against the canvas bag, sobbing into the salt, wishing I could help the birds, wishing I'd never come here at all. So long as I stay tucked inside my cottage, nobody will bother me, not even the witch finders. There are rumors of what haunts the woods, things so much worse than witches. The same things that live in the edges of my vision, swimming there in the dark. That's why I'm here, for this salt. A ring of it around my cottage will seal them out. Then maybe I won't spend tonight in the graveyard again, digging there because the phantoms tell me to. I lean against the stone wall of the alley to steady myself. One more item in this day, this trip will be over. And the place I need is so close, only a few dozen paces to the end of the street, to the seamstress's shop. It's a small brick house with one room, no windows, and a front door that's always unlocked, always welcoming. Inside, Beatrix hunches over yards of muslin and linen, her world-worn eyes squinting at unraveled hems, her sun-spotted hands smoothing out a fresh seam. She barely glances up from her treadle as the door slams behind me. "Hello, Odette," she says, her voice warm as fresh gingerbread, and I exhale a breath I didn't know I was holding. Beatrix has never been like the others. For years, she used to practice a bit of folk magic herself, homemade salves and tinctures and oxymels, how to deliver a stubborn baby, how to break the meanest of fevers. Now she pretends to know only about burlap and spindles and how to sharpen a dull sewing needle. It's safer that way. It's always safer not to be a witch. And I will stop there for now.
It is always safer not to be a witch. But safe makes better. But I'm hearing some echoes. But not being safe makes for good fiction.
Yes, that's definitely true. All right. So moving on to back to Underworld Dreams. So let's look at another story from Underworld Dreams, The Monkey Coat. One of the things going on in the story is the unreliability of the narrator and the unreliability of the character's perception. So there are instances when the main character, June, keeps thinking she took off her coat, but then the readers see that she's still wearing it. So unreliable narrators and questioning of perception is a really classic element of horror fiction. And in this story, how perceptions are used and what is the importance of creating a sense of uncertainty about what is real.
Wow. Before I answer the question, it's really turning out to be the animal menagerie night of questions. We're going from fish to birds, and we're on to the monkey part of our evening here. Who knows where we're going to end up? But yeah. So the story, The Monkey Coat. It's really briefly, the story is playing with the tension. Is this character June having a breakdown? Or does she have this haunted coat that's causing her to do violent things? So that it's all about the perceptions. Like, I tried really hard in that story to have a set of actions, a set of things that are going to both equally support, is this a psychological breakdown or is this a haunted coat? That was like the way I was doing that story. So Yeah, so for me, how important is it? Like for this story, it's the whole cake.
Mhm.
It's just I love playing with that in the stories, but this one in particular, it really was the thrust of the story.
Very cool. Very cool. While not overtly depicted, there is an element of violence to the story, and it's also a story about suffering. And so while the suffering isn't at the forefront, suffering is mentioned in several ways by different characters. So can you tell us about that and how that came into play for the story?
One of the earliest inspirations for the story, and I'm a big fan of the the uh, the platitude "kill your darlings," but one of the original ideas of the story, I wanted this to be my fur story, and I'm an anti. I happen to be an anti fur kind of person,
Mhm. Mhm.
and once upon a time there was a monkey coat in my life. So I was trying to figure out, well, how do I depict that in fiction? That's something that's both interesting and interesting to me. Now the low hanging fruit is to do an anti fur story,
Mhm.
but I feel like things that are on the nose make for bad fiction. Um, so, um, yeah, I guess it was challenging that way in choosing. Um, so, so I wanted to make the story about something else other than just the fur. I mean, I think the way I handled that was okay. It's present. It's an issue. We see people having different points of view on that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Yet, um, maybe it became more of a story about suffering and people's different approaches to it. So
Mhm. Mhm. Very good. Very good. So last summer, you released your first longer form work, the novella The Serpent Shadow from Cemetery Dance. So, how is it similar to your short fiction and how is it a departure?
well, that story is similar in terms of the setting. It's another Central America. It's another Yucatan set story, and it's similar in some of the things we were talking about earlier, um, about a place in a time of change. And in this, the thrust of that story is, in many ways, it is the story of Cancun, which is now
Mhm.
this, or was, God knows what it is now, but this immensely uh, popular and populated tourist trap or place, spring break kind of thing. Whereas if you turn back the clock, not very long ago, at least in my lifetime, um, it was a a wild place, both in terms of development and in terms of lawlessness. Almost like what used to be our Wild West, that very quickly became like this international cosmopolitan kind of place.
Mhm.
So that's just very interesting to me to write about that, and even
Mhm.
to maybe write. I'm very much into Tim Powers, who writes secret histories of places, or take something
Mhm.
right before us that we think we know
Mhm.
and write something else. What's different about it is, because of the longer form, I was able to write a story over time, which is something
Mhm.
I don't do that much in uh, in the short story. So yeah, it was really great to be able to have an idea, a bigger idea, or if not a bigger idea, just an idea playing out over time and not having it
Mhm.
be stuffed stuffed in there.
So, another question about Underworld Dreams, and already mentioned the recurring theme of water in the book. How does setting come into play in your creative process?
Yeah, there's another thing we were talking about. Setting is My creative process is not. I guess people call it, are you a planner or are you a pantser? Are you by the seat of the pants or do you plan? I'm
Mhm.
very much a planner, but
Mhm.
the part that is not planned, the part that I can't plan, is that spark. And for me, the spark is always setting. It's always setting first. It's always like, oh, I need to write about here or there, or I'm dreaming about here or there. So that's where it starts to come. Those are the first pieces of magic. Those are the first images that, okay, how do we know that, and from there, that's where I go into planning mode. I start to think about, okay, if I'm writing, if I'm going to be writing about the Yucatan in the 80s, I want to then, the characters and their conflicts spin off from there. Like I will then try to develop, if I don't already have a character in mind, develop a character that could only be from there, and conflicts, problems that could only spin out from there. I do have other processes, but that's the main one, and it's very setting forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And that comes through wonderfully in your work. I think that, when I think of your work, I think of these very strong settings. And so I can believe that that's how it starts, because that's such a huge part of your work, and you do that so very well. So my next question is something we've already touched a lot on. Animals and the natural world frequently appear in your stories. So the story Goodnight Kookaburra is set in Australia. Can you tell us about your use of animals in the natural world? And can you tell us about the unique setting of this story? So you probably already told us about the use of animals in general, but yeah. I like kookaburras. So
we titled tonight's title of the show, and it should have been Dan and Gwendolyn Talk About Animals. Sponsored by Popcorn, Carvel Ice Cream, and Black Phillip, your spokesperson.
Black Phillip, yay!
Oh god, I love Kookaburra as well. I mean, they're just such an amazing bird there. So I mean, we've talked so much about animals. I'll say something about that story. Maybe it's not animal related, but it's setting related. So it's not mentioned overtly in the story, but when I did travel to Australia, one of the things I learned about was Aboriginal places and sacred places, and how they are gender specific. So there are places that are male, and there are places that are female. So okay, I mean, this is a concept that makes sense to me in the concept of language. I mean, the languages that I've heard of that before. But so now if you have a sacred spot that is apparently, let's say, okay, that tree, that grove of trees is a male thing. It's a male icon or a male thing. So that supposedly the lore behind that is that area is going to be very beneficial to males in contact and proximity to it, and the opposite to the opposite gender. It's going to be it's going to be a bane and not dangerous, but degenerative, and vice versa. So one of the magic or the speculative element in play in Goodnight Kookaburra, I wanted to illustrate that, but without naming it. And the kookaburra just happened to be the animal that plays that out in the story.
Very cool. Very cool. So the speculative element, or the element relating to the lore that you just mentioned, is never overtly named or mentioned in the story Goodnight Kookaburra. So why did you make that choice? And what are some of the factors that come into play for you in choosing to name or to make a speculative element overt, or deciding not to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play, but one thing that I like about it, or at least in fiction as a reader, is that naming comes into play with expectations, and it's sort of similar to what I was talking about, The Strange Tale. I'm like, okay, if that's a vampire, we definitely have expectations of it. Okay, it can still be a vampire but we're not going to be like, get your crosses, we're going to go kill that vampire. And maybe that's like a bad example, but I feel like in strange tales, in weird fiction, in certain corners of this grand umbrella of horror, if we don't name it, we can be free of those expectations. And then if we're free of those expectations, it opens the story up to different possibilities. You don't necessarily have to do that. So that's something I like to, and I feel like it also maybe helps me become a better writer, or maybe a more interesting writer. That happened in another story in Underworld Dreams, Tommy's Shadow. The thing, or the bad thing in the story, is in my mind meant to be a Dybbuk, which is a very specific kind of a ghost from Jewish folklore, but it's never mentioned in the story. The Judaism doesn't come into play. It was just like, okay, this is what I've heard Dybbuks do, and this is what it is. I'm just going to write my Dybbuk story, and okay, maybe it's not, you're not coming into it thinking this is a story even about a ghost at all. It's a story about an abandoned asylum, so it still has something else in play there. So yeah, I think not naming things, it frees us from expectations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So you're going to do another reading, yes?
Yeah, and I've forgotten. I forgot what I'm going to read. I think I'm going to read a bit from Goodnight Kookaburra, since we're talking about that. Okay, here's again. I'm going to start. Going to read a bit from the ending of Goodnight Kookaburra tonight. I'm just trying different things, and instead of just reading the setups, we're just going to keep them short, and I'll read the knockdown. So this is a bit from Goodnight Kookaburra from Underworld Dreams. Oh, so in Goodnight Kookaburra, we have a narrator who has traveled to Australia in a bit of a reverse kind of walkabout, in sort of a healing journey to recapture his sense of place in his life. Amelia has family all up and down the Gold Coast, all the way to north of Brisbane. She grew up surfing Australia's waters and bushwalking in places like these. She tells me that I'm bound to hear kookaburras on this eucalyptus tree laden route she's been taking me hiking on. There's no path, nothing marked. We've stopped on the side of the road. Somewhere she's decided that looks good. Look out for the drop bears out there, she says. What? They're small and gray and slow moving, but are really fierce. They like to drop down from the trees on unsuspecting passers-by and bite their necks. A few minutes in, I see one of her drop bears, a koala, high in the branches of a tall eucalyptus, feasting on long tapered leaves. There's one, I say, very funny. The copse of trees with the koala in it overlooks a gulch. Amelia leads us down the brush-choked side. It's a dried-up riverbed, all trace of water gone with the baking Australian summer heat. I notice a set of clothes caught in the tops of a barren sapling. A child's clothes. I can't tell if they are a boy's or a girl's. I'm not sure if Amelia sees them, but I think it is very odd that they are there. Probably left behind by a family bathing in the river. We hike a few minutes further. Amelia stops. There are a child's shoes tied together and slung in the low branches of a eucalyptus tree ahead of us, tied up in the way my parents' generation used to tie the outgrown shoes and throw them over power lines. You saw the clothes in that tree back there too, right? I say. Amelia nods. I can tell she's trying to make heads or tails of the shoes. I thought maybe they were left behind or something, but this bed's been dry for months, she says. Are we being chicken? No, something's not right. Let's turn around. With her words, birds take to the air from the top of a eucalyptus. The raucous cloud of kookaburra, gullas, magpie, and cockatoos fills the bush with chatter. Only with their din did I realize the forest was so silent. No problem with me, I say. We hike as fast as we can back to the car. At the last bend before the road, a tumble of feathers and scales bursts from the brush. A big goanna and a brush turkey roll across the path, a tornado of squawks and hisses and open red mouth biting. So what do we do? Call the police? I say. Nothing's happened, Amelia says. This is Australia. We don't call the police for nothing. I'm an American. Something was wrong back there. I know you know it too. Don't let it ruin the rest of your day. Give it a few minutes. We get into Amelia's car and she drives. 15 minutes up the road, we turn off onto a dirt road. A few minutes later, we are pulling up to a house. An old friend of one of my aunties, Amelia says. I used to come here all the time when I first moved up. You'll like him. He was once a Yank too. An old man is sitting in a rocking chair on the raised porch of his Queenslander with a shotgun across his lap. The clean smell of fresh air and turned over earth greets us, along with the tang of potent marijuana. Well, look what the cat dragged in, the old man says. And you brought a boy home, too. He's just a friend, Pops, she says. The house is surrounded on all sides by meticulous rows of fruit trees, a ring of trees, 10, 12 trees deep on all sides before the thick bush. To the west is a low hill, a rounded outcropping of rock, gently sloping towards the sky. I wonder why it is so brown and dry despite the lush green everywhere. We climb the stairs to the porch. We're having friends over for drinks, Pops says. You just come to do laundry and have a smoke, or are you going to stay? An old woman I take to be his wife comes outside with tall glasses of iced lemonade and hand-rolled cigarettes on a tray. I notice the way she looks at the hill and how quickly she moves to return inside. Mimi, Amelia says, grabs her hand and brings them together for a hug. Come inside, dear, Mimi says. I hear her whispering as they walk away. He never leaves the ground, just plants his trees and minds them. Smoke? Pops says. It's not a question. Not a smoker, I say, but thank you kindly. Shame. I don't trust anyone who don't smoke with me. What are you doing here with Amelia? We work together on construction of that. I see right through you. You're not telling yourself the truth, so you're not telling us the truth. About what? How should I know? I barely know you. A van with a surfboard atop it pulls up next to Amelia's car. A noisy bunch of people get out and climb to the porch. One of them is the man who sat next to me on the plane. His skin is tanner and his beard is longer. I don't see the blonde he was with at the airport among the people who look half his age. We'll finish this later, Pop says. Party's about to begin. Shame you ain't gonna stay. Hey, it's you, the guy from the plane says warmly when he sees me. You made it. I knew you had it in you. He takes a joint and a glass of lemonade from the tray. He offers it to me. I put up my hand. He shrugs and Pops scowls. Got a girl? No, not yet. Maybe you find one tonight. That would be nice. How much time left on your trip? The boy's got work to do, Pops says. He's got all the time he needs. This pleases the man from the plane, and I don't bother to correct Pops. So that's just a little bit from Goodnight Kookaburra from Underworld Dreams. Moving along to our next set of questions. I wanted to ask you about a range of questions from your other work, short stories and novellas. One story that I just recently read was your short story, The 8 People Who Murdered Me, excerpt from Lucy Westerna's diary, which is a fantastic short story. I believe it is from the November 2019 issue of Nightmare magazine. I have you on mute, which is an unfun. What, are you off mute now?
I am. I think I am.
Okay. Maybe I should I should force myself to be punished and be on mute now. Like, what an unfun way to do an event. But yeah, I think that so that can still be read for free online there over at Nightmare Magazine, and it's got a cool author spotlight and interview of you over there as well. So if you haven't read this one yet, it's a retelling, a revisiting of Dracula by Bram Stoker, which all of us know from Lucy's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things that will catch your attention about the story, but one of them you mentioned in the interview section there, you mentioned Robert Aikman's pages from a young girl's journal is referenced. You referenced it there, so I'm never going to pass up an opportunity to talk about Robert Aikman. So before I go right into Lucy, I just wanted to ask you, what was it about the Aikman story, or what you think about that particular Aikman story?
I actually don't think I'd even read it until I was writing this story, and in part because I wanted to make sure I wasn't covering too much similar ground, because I had heard a lot about this story. The story, Pages from a Young Girl's Journal, had sort of lived almost in my imagination for a long time because so many people had talked about it, and I knew it was a vampire story that was sort of like, not really exactly a retelling, it is an original story, but I knew it was very much from a female perspective of this girl who's been bitten. So it was like, I remember being like, should I read it before? And I'm like, yeah, I should, just to make sure that it's not covering any similar ground that, because I always think if you find something that's covered similar ground that you want to do, you just take it in you take your work in another direction. But I remember like staying up like until like 4 a.m. with my husband asleep in the bed next to me, like reading this story, because I was like, I'll read part of it. And then I just kept going through it. And it's a really interesting, it's a novella, I think, or a novelette. It's not a short story. I think it's too long to be a short story, but it's very interesting. And she's kind of very matter of fact at points, and I like her voice in it. And it doesn't, I think there's a lot, I don't want to say too much, but they incorporate the wolves in that a little bit, right? They incorporate, this idea of the wolves being familiars for vampires, which I love. And it's something that I'm working actually into my next work. So I love that. Again, back to the animals. You and I really, like, even as you were reading your excerpt, like, I'm like, wow, we are really, everybody at home is gonna be like, you too and your animal.
The animal zeitgeist is with us tonight.
It is. And I remember really loving the wolves and how they're incorporated, toward the end of the story. And it's just really Aikman does some great stuff with the vampire mythology and really making it his own. And I think out of all of his work that I've read, now I have not read all of Aikman, but I've read a number of stories from Aikman. It's sort of the most explicit and overt of his work. A lot of his stuff is so much like dreamlike, almost like, I wonder if David Lynch has read Robert Aikman, for example, because
it's a total anomaly among Aikman stories, and I haven't read them all, or I'm reading them very, very slowly because I know there are only a limited amount of them. But what's different about Pages from a Young Girl's Journal is it is not a strange tale. It's I'm not using vanilla derogatorily. It is a standard. This is a vampire story. This is like the exact opposite of Aikman's own work. Like, there's no question. This is a vampire story. This is a young girl, and she's been turned into a vampire. And we, the reader, know that, like, oh God, she's traveling with a traveling circus, and we know, like we know what's going to happen, but the people in the story don't. So it just happens to be a really well written vampire story. Like, go figure. But it shares structurally in common with your also very cool, very unique vampire story, and that they're both excerpts from Lucy Westerner's
because that was
pages. So it's cool when a title and inspiration sort of like you're riffing and referencing on other pieces of it.
Yeah, because that's something I realized I really wanted to do this as like something from her perspective. And then I was like, I would really like it to be, something like she's writing in a diary. And then I'm like, well, then, like I said, I want to be like, oh, I want to go back to this other story and make sure. And they, it's, I think, like a nice nod to Aikman while still covering very different ground. I think that they're very different stories. So I do love, like you said, like most of Aikman's stuff is so weird and so off the wall. And this is like, it's almost like he was like subverting himself, like almost like, yeah, I can totally write a completely straightforward vampire story, which is kind of like that, and a ghost story are two of the most kind of standard horror stories. And so it's fun. It's like kind of anomalous in his work, but it's so much fun.
It's such a shame that he doesn't talk about his creative process. I mean, it was one of his last, well, I'm not sure if it was one of his very last stories, but I know it was the one awarded story. It was the one that won him the World Fantasy Award, which is like it's just so like, oh wow, like I think often in awards, sometimes we give awards for a person's body of work. So it just seems like an odd story to like for Aikman to win an award for, because it's like, wow, this isn't, you wouldn't think about Aikman, he's got like 44 short stories and like 43 of them are these David Lynch type things, and then like, okay, 40, yeah, as long as you stop being Robert Aikman, we'll give you this award. No, it wasn't like that at all. But he was very much respected and liked by the people who were doing that first World Fantasy Awards. I think this was like, it's time to give old Robert Aikman some credit, and I think whatever story he was having at that point, people just wanted to uplift him there, but with a cool vampire story. So hey, it goes back to what I was saying, like horror's that big umbrella, like
it is.
So back to Lucy. You mentioned that in that interview, it's over at Nightmare, that people can check out, that Lucy is like the forgotten one. She's the one that's forgotten by the rest of the characters. And this story, I think you said, was a chance to reassert her voice when no one else is even worried about her existence. And I find that fits in so perfectly with what I perceive as themes that are present and well done in your work. The forgotten, there's a lot of outsiders and forgotten people and forgotten women and discarded women. And can you talk about this in your work and how it affected your approach to Lucy in this story?
Yeah, I just remember I would always ask about famous works and things if I hadn't read them when I was really little, and I talked to my parents about it, and I'd always be like, well, who are the girl characters? Because I always wanted to know about the female characters and things. And I remember I think it was my mom actually saying, well, there's Mina and there's Lucy, and Lucy's the one that dies and Mina's the one that lives. And I always remember that being like, it seemed to me, especially looking back, that's such a microcosm for how a lot of like horror or other things are. You have the one that's the good one, and you have the one that's kind of like, if not the bad one, but not the one that survives. And Lucy's kind of flirtatious, and so it's kind of like, oh, she's not really the good Victorian, and so this thing happens to her. And so there was something that always bothered me, and I love Sadie Frost in Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think her depiction of Lucy is just so great and is so what I imagine Lucy to be. And she's so vivacious. And again, then once she's, killed off in the movie, it's just kind of like, that's it. We don't really hear about her very much again. Maybe a couple people mention her. In the book, I think they mention her a little bit more than they do in most of the movies. Most of the movies, they just, she's dead, that's it. Once we stake her, it's over. In the book, they do talk about her periodically, even though I did say everybody else forgot about her in that interview. That's not super fair, but it's still, it's almost, she becomes a symbol for the rest of them. And it's like, oh, she's the one that we have to avenge. And so for me, it was just like, well, what's going on from her perspective? How is she feeling about this? And we get some of her letters in the original story, but we don't get a lot from her, especially once everything gets really bad. And so, and I've always loved her character. And it was one of those things I'm like, I want to know more about this character. And so that's. And now I'm writing a novel that expands upon this. So now I've been living with Lucy for even longer. Like, I feel like I know Lucy personally at this point.
That was my next question. I was going to say, it's such an interesting thing. I was going to say, I'm glad that you mentioned that we're going to get a whole novel. Can you share with us the name of the title yet, or is that not really?
Oh, yeah, it's been announced. It's Reluctant Immortals. So it's actually Lucy from Dracula and Bertha Antoinetta Mason from Jane Eyre. So Edward Rochester's
Oh,
first wife from the attic that was back. So it's like the two of them in the 1960s. So because I love the 1960s, very tumultuous times.
I
Like,
did not know that. That sounds
yeah,
even more exciting. And that's coming,
hopefully. So
and that's coming
yeah,
out from the publisher is
Saga Press. Yeah, Saga Press, and it'll be coming out next year. So
okay.
2022.
Fantastic. We're really looking forward to that. It sounds really exciting. I think it just sounds like a great idea, and I think you're a great person to be handling that. So really looking forward to that. Um, another cool take on something classic that you did was your first novella, Pretty Mary's All in a Row, and we spoke about that in detail last month at the Ghost Story Festival. I mentioned it because I wanted to ask you about your second novella, which it's got a great title, In the Rose-Colored House Where Which They Died, which was a limited edition from Thunderhouse Books, but it's sold out immediately. It's all gone. So I haven't had a chance to read it yet. So but without spoiling it, can you tell us about this book, and is it going to be reprinted, and will it be more widely available?
All right. So all
A
right,
bunch of
well,
stuff.
what it's
Yeah.
about? It is actually about a house full. The rose-colored house is a house full of possessed girls, and they're kind of just bothering this town. They're this group of girls, and they've each gotten possessed one by one and gone up to this house, and like the town keeps trying to like exorcise them and like get the demons out, and the girls are like, mm-mm. Because I really thought, like, we see a lot of possession movies, and I'm like, what if the girl's just like, hey, I like being possessed. This is way more fun than what, as we were talking about with the witch. Like, what if actually being the witch, what if actually being what's considered bad is just so much more fun? And so, and I also thought, like, I didn't like The Exorcist when I was younger. As I've gotten older, I like it a lot more, and I love the character of Father Karras. I think he's so great, and he's such an interesting character. But then I thought, what if he wasn't nice like he is in the movie? Like the priests are pretty nice in The Exorcist. Like they've got like good intentions, but what if the priests were jerks? What if they were mean and trying to come and like exorcise these girls? So that's sort of like the sort of setup and what we're looking at in the novella. As for whether or not it's going to be wider released, I don't think so right now. Like I'm probably going to include it in my next collection, but I don't even have like that's still down the road. Like I love fiction, short fiction. I always talk about how much I love short fiction and novelettes and novellas. So I definitely there'll be one at some point, but nothing specific yet.
You have a lot of awesome things on your plate. I mean, that's just the one that we're gonna have to dream. For those of us who don't have it, like I'm the one like we'll have to dream about it for now. But one book that is available now is your charitable chapbook, The Invention of Ghosts, which is out from Nightscape Press. Another one that we talked about at the New York Ghost Story Festival.
Yes.
But you've mentioned that this is your most personal story yet. Could you tell us why, or what's personal about the story, The Invention of Ghosts, to you?
Yeah, it's about two girls who are friends, and the friendship is starting to sort of tear apart as they get older. That's really a very kind of like supernatural free version of it. It has a lot more of like the occult and ghosts, obviously. But at its heart, it's really a story about growing up and losing those friendships. And I feel like all of us have probably lost some friendships over the years. And a lot of times when I think about loss in my own work, especially with horror, I think about actual death. I actually think about, we're morbid as horror writers, at least a little bit, right? And so I think about that. But then there's also the kind of loss that's probably even more common in life of when you just grow apart from people. Obviously romantic relationships break up, but friendships break up too. And it's very sad and it's very painful because it's like, it's this thing created between two people, this relationship. Nobody has died, but the relationship has, and really exploring that and the pain of that, because it is very painful. It can be a very, even with friendships, obviously we have more of an understanding of like, oh, a romantic relationship breaking up, that we have more of an understanding of like, yes, that's hard for people. Like, I feel like that's the thing that people are quicker to talk about. But when you lose friendships, especially from people you were very close to, it can be very devastating, and it's a huge loss as well. And so that was really where I was coming into that, of thinking about the people that you just grow apart from, that you just don't have things in common with anymore, and that sense of loss, that you want to move on, and you want to have the life that you're building for yourself, but how sometimes people don't come along for that ride. Either you don't want them to, or they don't want to, or you just slowly drift apart. So
yeah, it's one of the poignant and maybe unspoken things, or not really something we have such a social language for. Like, we have such a social and even like a fiction language for the breakup, the bad breakup, the good breakup, the breakup, but like, it's often maybe we laugh it off or brush it off, like how we become different people and different, right? And like you said it really succinctly in your analysis, just, yeah, maybe people don't come along for that ride, but it's such a poignant work. Like, yeah, you're taking the speculative element out of it. Yeah, even without the speculative element, it's a really poignant work, and it's just like a really cool ghost story too. It just got the ghosts. Yeah, we could tune into our discussion of the ghost in the Ghost Story Festival video. But yeah, it's a really cool ghost story. Are you going to? We're going to turn it over to you to do your second reading. Are you going to read from it?
I think I'm going to just keep going with Boneset, if that's good.
Okay, yeah, super cool. Okay, yeah, so yeah, tune into the New York Ghost Story Festival where Gwendolyn reads from Invention of Ghosts, which I highly recommend. But we're going to continue our menagerie night, and we're going to pick up a little bit more with more from Boneset and Feathers, her latest novel.
All right, so we're just picking up right where we left off. She's in the seamstress shop right now. What can I do for you today? She asks, and I hesitate, my nervous fingers fumbling with a row of buttons and golden clasps and a spool of black thread. 1 yard of red ribbon, please, I say, my voice steady, trying not to give myself away. But Beatrix knows me too well. Her eyes flick up at me. For a knot spell? She asks, and when I fidget, saying nothing else, that more than answers her question. Only it's not for a spell. Not really. More like a compulsion. Every time in the night when my fingers start to shake, when my hands remember what it's like to hold an athame or light a taper candle at midnight, I keep myself occupied by tying a knot. This is what I've been doing for years now, looping every yard of ribbon, 100 times, 1,000 even, until my last piece is frayed and crumbled into dust. That's not exactly magic. If anything, it's the inverse of magic, a world without spells and without power, just how the villagers want this place. Let me see what I've got, Beatrix says. Humming to herself, she roots through a box of jumbled notions, picking out this and discarding that until finally she tugs a thin bolt of red ribbon from the bunch. Her body hunched, she works slowly, slower than she used to, her hands gnarling like willow roots. She's the same age as my mother, or at least the age my mother would have been. It's strange to think how much older the world is getting. With a snick-snack of scissors, she cuts an arm's length of ribbon and slides it across the counter to me. I don't move to take it. How much do I owe you? I ask, my hand in my pocket gripping the last coin to my name. Beatrix gives me that smile of hers that never seems to fade. You keep your money, darling. You know that. I take the ribbon and tuck it in the pocket of my goatskin jacket, nodding goodbye to her. Above us, there's the patter of what sounds like rain, and I wonder which birds are descending on us now. Try not to worry, Odette, Beatrix says as I head toward the door. This storm won't last forever. Outside, I gaze down the street, the storefronts and houses contorting in size, the whole world moving nearer and farther at the same time. Nearby, a starling hits a slate roof and tumbles into the gutter. Dust and feathers rise up around me along with the wet metallic scent of blood, and my flesh prickles. Sack of salt weighing heavy in my arms. I've got what I came for. It's time to go home. But the quickest way out of town is straight down the street in front of me, the street where I used to live, and I won't look at what's become of the place I once called home. Instead, I take the long way around, past the tavern with its pitched roof and the blacksmith shop where the furnace is always glowing the color of hellfire. I'm almost to the end of the lane when the stable with its narrow field comes into view. Most of the horses have been herded inside the barn, but a lone palfrey stands against the fence, his liquid eyes staring out into the village, seeing everything and nothing, unperturbed at the falling birds. I reach out and run my fingers through his mane, thick and tangled like briars. The horse isn't like all the villagers. He doesn't cringe at my touch. But the moment doesn't last. A hulking figure emerges from the stables, his calloused hands with a riding crop always at the ready. He spots me immediately, his face flaring crimson. Get out of here, Odette. I force a smile. Hello to you too, Samuel. I mean it, he says, and a dove topples into a nearby water trough. You've got no reason to be here. Next to me, the horse grunts as if in agreement, and I flinch and start walking along the fence, pretending not to notice the white feathers floating like fresh snow through the air. On the other side, Samuel keeps pace with me, his hand tightening around the riding crop. Do you think it's wise to stand so close to the fence? I smile again. Do you think it's wise to threaten a witch? At this, he exhales a rueful laugh. You never change, Odette. Neither do you, Samuel. His house is right next door to the stable, a stout little cottage with a tuft of smoke like spun sugar rising out of the chimney. Behind the front window, there's a flutter of movement, and I seize up, waiting to see a face, waiting to see her. I almost speak her name aloud, the one name I can never forget. Anna, Samuel's daughter. After the parents dragged all the other girls home, it was only me and her, dancing barefoot around midnight bonfires together. The two of us would creep out our bedroom windows and meet on the street in front of my house. Come on, I'd say, and lead her by the hand up into the forest. And don't listen when the wind whispers lies in your ears. Wherever I went, she'd always giggle and keep up with me. The only one I thought for sure would stick with me forever, and I haven't spoken it to her since the night the witch-finders arrested me. That was the way Samuel wanted it, no doubt. It's not safe out in those woods, he'd tell Anna, and apparently she finally believed him. I continue walking, Samuel's eyes still fixed on me. At the end of the fence, I try to break away, but with a swift hand, he opens the gate and crosses in front of me, his broad body blocking my way. They're gone for now, he says through clenched teeth. Don't give those men a reason to return. I back away, my fingers curling into fists, the satchel of salt contorting in my arms. I'm not the reason they came here in the first place. No, he says, but you'll be the reason they come back. These words twist like a dull blade in my chest, and something rises up inside me, an incantation I tried to forget. I part my lips to speak, everything in me ready to boil over, but all at once the birds stop falling. I look up, my heart gone cold, and the sky is so strange and plain and quiet. Samuel scoffs. About time, he says, and curses under his breath before retreating into the stable. He'll lose a whole day to sweeping away feathers from inside the fence. One more reason for him to hate me. I keep moving, glancing back only once at Anna's window, but nobody's there now, if she was ever there at all. I'm probably looking for someone where there's only a shadow. The end of the lane, the school doors swing open, and the children dash out, chortling on the front lawn, tossing up limp feathers like paper confetti. Their teacher lingers behind them, a thin smile plastered on her terrified face. She glances up at me, and I look away. We used to know each other, too. She's another one of the girls who would come with us to the forest, another one who'd rather I disappeared for good now. Down the road, back at the general store, others start trickling home as well, their ragged boots crunching thousands of hollow bones on the cobblestone road. It's my turn to go home, too. I take the long way out of town alone along a lonely dirt path that eventually leads up to the main road, and as I pass the last house in the village, Samuel's words echo in my mind. They're gone for now. For now. We live perpetually in the present tense. There's no lingering in yesterday, the weight of our grief too heavy to bear. No point in worrying about tomorrow. Between famine and witch-finders, we have no guarantee of any moment past this one. Today is all that counts. Except that won't be enough to save us. The villagers believe if only they could cup their hands over my mouth and keep me quiet a little longer, this will all turn out fine. They don't understand the logic of witch-finders, how these men are patient, how they'll circle back around eventually. Just because they've moved on for now doesn't mean they've forgotten us. They've got all the time in the world to murder us. Right before the crossroads, I hesitate. Something is twitching up ahead in the dirt, a single crow, its wings broken, the beak split down the middle. It's barely alive now. I rush to it and draw it up in my arms, cradling it to my chest, willing it to live. We've lost so many today, but not all the birds have to leave me. I could keep one. I could save one. That won't make up for the rest, but it will make up for something. Only it's already too late. The bird goes limp in my arms, and I gag down a sob, resting my forehead against its silent chest, listening for a heartbeat that won't return. Something else I've lost. One more thing I couldn't save. Will you please give him to us? A small voice asks, startling me. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, is standing next to me, flashing a gap-toothed grin. There are other children behind her, a whole line of them, faces down, stringy hair slung over their eyes. In front of them, as reverent as an altar, is a wooden wagon packed with dead birds, their bodies crumpled, their slick feathers glinting in the noonday sun. I inch away. What are you doing with all of them? The little girl curls up her nose. Burying them, of course, she says, as though she could have no other reason. Will you give him to us now? I swallow hard, clutching the crow, the contents of that wagon whirling my stomach. It's a grotesque sight to behold, the stench of death wafting from it like steam off summer stone. Maybe it's not so odd, though. Maybe their parents turned them loose to tidy up the streets, commanding them to pluck the broken bodies off the cobblestone and get rid of them. After all, somebody needs to clean up the mess they think I made. I need to help clean this up as well. With a shaky hand, I pass the crow to the little girl, and she lays him on the top of the pile. She gives me another grin. Come with us, Odette, she says, and before I can argue, she's leading the way, the procession drifting forward, her and her friends humming sweetly out of tune. I follow behind, wanting to know where they're headed. These aren't the same children that were skipping from the school. I've never seen any of them before. Other than the little girl, I haven't seen them even now. Their hair over their faces, their hair over their eyes, faces turned away. I can't get a good look. They're walking right in front of me, but it's like I'm staring at shadows. The little girl turns back. Did the birds do something to make you angry? She asks, and the question hits me hard, nearly stopping me where I stand. No, I whisper. I loved these birds. The other girls and I would call to them in the forest, drawing them down to us, the crows with their seashells wrapped in twine, the magpies with their shiny nests, the blue jays, always with something new to say. After what the witchfinders did, I've waited for years for the birds to come back, never expecting it to be like this. That's because magic is a curious thing. It has a tendency to boil up in unexpected ways. I've tried so hard to keep myself from speaking, from chanting, from howling at the moon. But with all this grief stitched up inside me, everything I want is going wild. The little girl looks ahead on the road. We're almost there, she says. And that's when I see it, the sloping hill of the village graveyard. I should have guessed this was our destination. Where else would we go for a funeral? I'm going to stop there.
Okay. That was from Boneset and Feathers, Chapter 1. Circling back to birds in our menagerie of a night there. So before we ask our last, we're getting near the end of the event. Before we ask our last little round of questions, what do you have coming up? What's your next events? What's your next books coming out? What do you have to promote for us?
Yeah, mostly right now it's just Boneset and Feathers. The next book, like I said, isn't coming out until next year, so it's still a little ways away. Probably have some short fiction out between now and then. And I've got some events for Women in Horror Month coming up next month, but a lot of them I can't quite announce yet, so watch my social media. And I will be doing my annual Women in Horror Roundtable on my blog, so I'm very excited about that. I just get together a bunch of really great, awesome women who are doing awesome writing in horror and just interview them, see where they're at, what they're doing, how they're celebrating women in horror, and yeah, just a good time.
All right, so we'll be tuning into your sites and your social media for what's coming up next from you. Next up around here is we're going to be back after Women in Horror Month, back in the month of March, March 4th, and I'll be talking more about Underworld Dreams with author John Langan, and we'll be talking about his latest Children of the Fangs. So that'll be on March 4th. So we'll spend our last few minutes on a little speed round sort of a question where I think we're gonna ask each other, we're gonna throw the same question or a similar question at each other, and like I think I was trying to make up like a little feature of like favorite things. So tonight I picked questions of like favorite author, favorite Hollywood star, favorite horror, 80s horror, writing wish lists, and ghosts. So I know you're a big Bradbury fan, one of your favorite authors. What's one of your favorite Bradbury stories and why?
I always go with this one, but probably The Lake. It's a very simple, it's from the October Country. It was published elsewhere before that, but I read it in the October Country. And it's a very simple ghost story in a lot of ways, but it's very beautiful. It's very heartrending, and it's one of those stories that when I read it, it was like, wow, this is still horror, but it's not horror like I'd ever really read before. And that opened up doors for me as a writer and even as a reader as to what horror could be and how it covered so many different emotions, not just fear. And so, yeah, that's the one I always pick, but it's a good one.
Yeah, I read, I think that was what may have been my first Bradbury really recently. I think you and some other people recommended Bradbury, and October Country was the first thing that I read because of that recommendation.
Yay! All right, I know that Aikman is one of your favorite authors. If you had to pick a story, which one and why?
Yeah, Aikman is a recent, again, another new author for me, and hands down, I go with The Swords. It was my first Aikman story, and I just had a really great experience with it when I was at a convention. Peter Straub and some other people were doing this Aikman panel, and I'm just like, who's Robert Aikman? And Peter Straub was just sort of, he explained the story before I ever read it. And he was like, if you haven't read Aikman, go into the dealer's room and go buy it and go read it. And it was one of those situations where it was everything that he said it could be. It just like, it was where all the explosions went off in my mind, and just a very instrumental story for me in me learning about horror and strange tales and everything. And yeah, so it always hits my number one spot just because of that.
Very cool.
Moving on to our Hollywood section, there's a Sharon Tate movie that I wanted to watch and ask you about, but I didn't get a chance to do it before this event. So I just know that Sharon Tate is one of your favorite film stars. So what's one of your favorite, or if you do have a favorite performance by her?
That would have to be Eye of the Devil. I love Eye of the Devil. It's a cult horror movie. It's a lot like The Wicker Man, though it predated it by several years. And she is just fantastic in it. She's this very, very cool witch in it, and she's just great. And I feel like she's so underrated. I feel like Sharon Tate was so talented, and people did not want to give her credit for that at all. So, what was the movie you were going to watch? Was that the one, or was it another one?
No, I think it was either a documentary or it was a film about her. It's just been in my, do you remember that name of that one?
No, I don't think so. No.
Oh, I'll post about it when but yeah, it's just been in my queue, to be like, oh, okay, Sharon Tate. It's definitely not Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I like that one too. I like that, but this was definitely, I think, maybe it was just a documentary about Sharon Tate that you posted about that. I was just like, all right, gotta get my, unless I'm making it up. I hope I'm not. Like, it would be funny if I recommend it to you.
There have been a couple like short documentaries about her, but now I'm curious. You have to look it up because I want to watch it.
Yeah, it's quarantine, it's lockdown. I'm like jotting down Eye of the Devil. I'm like, I got my Sharon Tate Film Fest coming up here now.
I love it. That's great. All right, so who's one of your favorite Hollywood stars and why?
I don't think I have an answer, so I think I'm going to just go with Alfred Hitchcock because I'm just having my own self-education to Hitchcock. I have like a box set, and during lockdown, I've just been watching all these movies that I never saw. So we're gonna go with Hitch.
Okay, but any of the movies like really stick out for you that you've really enjoyed so far?
Yeah, oh God, I can't remember the name of it because I'm like terrible at names, but the one with the plane, the famous scene where Cary Grant is just like,
North by Northwest. North by Northwest.
Yeah. North by Northwest was just such a treat, such an original thing. Yeah.
Very fun.
I'm like the plane. So let's move to the 80s. 80s horror movies. Any favorites? Any sleeper favorites?
I'm thinking about this. Like my favorite is probably it's probably The Thing. But if I'm going to go with one that's like I feel like more unsung, I will go with another Carpenter movie and do Prince of Darkness because Prince of Darkness It's weird because I don't necessarily think it's as good of a movie as The Thing. I actually think The Thing is the better Carpenter movie. But I think about Prince of Darkness a lot. It really got under my skin, and like this is a spoiler again. It's like a 30-year-old movie now, probably longer than that, right? Yeah, longer than 30 years. We're all getting old. Oh no! But there's the end scene with a mirror, and somebody like it turns kind of liquid, and somebody goes through it, and like she gets taken away, and it's such a creepy scene. It disturbs me so much, and I think about it a lot. And I do a lot of stories of people disappear, where they're just like missing people in my work, and I think a lot about that scene. So I'll go with Prince of Darkness as more of like an unsung. I feel like it's being reassessed now. I think people are talking about it a little more in the last few years.
I think The Thing is like, you can't even like, The Thing just transcends 80s horror. I mean, it is 80s horror, but like The Thing, it's like, it's just so good. It's like, what's your favorite horror movie besides The Thing? In my book, The Thing is just like the perfect movie. It's just so good. I can't even. You just got to stop talking about it because it's just that good. So.
So how about you? What's your favorite 1980s horror movie?
God, I don't even have a favorite. Like I'm still like such a maybe I'm not quite a newbie, but I'm an intermediate or intermediate whatever. But my sleeper, I'm gonna go with the movie called Q.
Okay.
Yeah, Q. Like I think it's like the name of it is. I think it was Q the Feathered Serpent or Quetzalcoatl the Feathered Serpent. It's a miserable movie. I mean, it stars like Michael Moriarty, but it was just like nostalgia reasons. Like as a kid, I was just like, it really captured my imagination. Like I was like, what the hell is that? I want to see it. Like I saw it as a teenager, and it had that sense of wonder. It also and like I remember it scaring me back then. I remember I had like the sense of awe, the sense of horror, and I rewatched it, and it was just a sense of misery and how bad it was. But we're going with Q. That's my pick.
That's great.
So let's move into writerly stuff. Locations. Do you have either a setting, or if not a setting, a subject that anything that you'd like to write about that you haven't done so, and that's kind of on your writing wish list?
So there's actually like what's funny is the two things that popped into my head are famous people I want to write about. And I've got ideas for both of these stories, but I want to write a horror story with Rasputin. And I would like to write a totally different, not related story about Marie Antoinette. I would really like to write a horror story about Marie Antoinette. So both of them, and I think it's interesting because we have very strong opinions, I think, culturally of Rasputin and Marie Antoinette. And I think it'll be very interesting to kind of like pick some of those kind of perceptions apart. Some of the perceptions are completely accurate, I would say, of both of them, and some of them aren't. And so it's interesting as I've kind of had done a little bit of research as the years had gone on about each one of them individually, and I've watched like more documentaries and done more research since quarantine started, because I'm at least going to try to learn some things while in quarantine. And they're both very interesting people, a lot for the wrong reasons in some ways, but yeah, so I would like to write a story about each one of them. I think that would be, I don't think I've seen a lot of horror stories with either one of them. A little bit of Rasputin. I don't know that I've ever seen a horror story with Marie Antoinette, and it seems like that there's a lot to work with there. I feel like 10 writers could write 10 different horror stories about Marie Antoinette, and you could pick lots of different elements of why there was horror at that point. So
I like your goals though, of like secret histories and subverting what it is we think we know. I mean, these are fascinating things.
All right. So how about you? Do you have a location, a setting, or a subject that you would like to write about?
Yeah, now mine's just like a place. Like I'm like, it seems a little pale, like next to that, like kind of lofty, like anthology starters, right? The Kickstarter's right there. But I'm gonna go with Morocco. Like all my stories are sort of like taking me to Morocco, or people haven't gone there yet, or people are talking about it. And I was just trying to think of what's the appeal, and kind of like a twofold appeal. Like one was just like, I know it's like, historically it's always been like a place of peace. Like there's a place where like there's world religions are side by side, like of mosques and temples and churches, and it's like historically it was always a place of peace and that's really appealing. But then the other appeal of it is I know just sort of like the Crosby, Stills, and Nash hippie side of Marrakesh Express, and how like Morocco and Fez and all those cities were always just like it's kind of like the real world Austin Powers hippie bohemian gathering points of just like drug fueled adventures on trains to Morocco, and I'm just like, that's appealing.
I like that.
So I guess now let's move on to ghosts. I think you mentioned earlier that you said you want to believe in witchcraft and you want to believe in ghosts. So let's throw a two-pronged question. Do you believe in ghosts? And whether you do or don't, what's a cool non-supernatural explanation for ghosts that you may have heard of, like the electrical system, or something like that?
I would say yes, I do believe in ghosts. I do. I'm definitely somebody who would rather believe than not believe, just because I think, again, my belief is so much in the idea that there are so many things out there that we don't understand. There's that line, I believe, from Hamlet, and I'm going to probably butcher, but there's more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than dreamed of in your philosophy. And I always love this idea of there being so many more things than we know. And maybe it's not ghosts, maybe it's something else, but I do think that there are a lot of things in the world that we don't know yet. And that to me is actually a very exciting thing. And it kind of helps me to keep being curious and to keep learning about the world. So that's why I would say, yes, I believe in ghosts, because if it keeps me curious about the world, then I think that can only be a good thing. And a non-supernatural explanation, I just think we want to believe. I mean, it's like that X-Files thing, right? But it's true. We want to believe in something bigger. Maybe it's even tied to what I even just said of like wanting to believe that there are things in the world that we don't understand. And there are. So, I mean, from that perspective, but I think to me, that's like the main supernatural explanation I always go back to. So, yeah. So how about you? Do you believe in ghosts? And whether or not you do, what's an interesting explanation for them?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth with I want to believe. Like, I think I'm like pretty close to the line. Like maybe on any given day, I fall one way or the other in terms of. So I guess, am I like an agnostic with ghosts? Like, right? Like I want to believe. And I guess the reason I mention that is like, I know I believed in it. Like I was sure I believed in it for a long time. And some of my earlier experiences, we won't go into it, have been like debunked. Like I had some things where I'm like, I am sure that this is it. And like in the past, like of telling people these things, I'm like, wait a minute, like I've been convinced of the debunk. So I'm just like, wow. So I'm with you on that quote. Like I believe in the unknown, and I believe in I believe in the arrogance of thinking that we know everything, right? So I'm like anti-arrogance, and I'm with you on that Horatio quote. I guess I'm just like on the agnostic where I'm like, oh man, but like science has creeped in this. So like I guess I believe in ghosts, but I'm more likely to believe in them, which was like my asking my non-supernatural question. I'm more likely to believe that ghosts are something we just don't understand yet, or that experience. It's like I'm less likely to believe in, oh, it's a soul and boo, and I'm more likely to believe in any one of these explanations that come out there. So like the second part of the question, it's not in real life, but one of my favorite like non-supernatural explanations in fiction, I guess it's more science fiction, is in Tim Powers' I always mess up the name of the book. I think it's 7 Days to Never. I forget the amount of days, right? So I think it's 7 Days to Never. And he goes into this whole quantum reality. It's a very fast-paced and down-to-earth book, but he basically says like the ghosts that appear in his book are remnants of like alternate realities that have collapsed. So he's just like, oh, right, like somehow like this ghost of Dan Braum was just the Dan Braum in that reality, and it kind of is here. And I was just like,
Yeah, and I love that kind of stuff, because like the reality is there is no supernatural. There's nothing that science couldn't actually explain. And I remember like years ago, I thought of that one day and I'm like, oh my gosh, like kind of like, whoa. blew my mind a little bit. And then I was like, but that's good in a way, because like if something exists, then we can't explain it. Science, you know, will eventually be able to come up with an explanation of it. And again, there are things 100 years ago people couldn't believe that we can do now. And 500 years ago, certainly, and 100 years from now, there's going to be things that now we're like, I mean, it's weird even thinking about smartphones. I know we have acclimated to them so much, but even 20 years ago, the thought of having a computer that tells you basically anything you want to know at any moment that's in your pocket, that's something even 20 years ago, I'm not sure we would have been able to be like, oh yeah, totally. Even in Star Trek, when they had those little things, only a few people had them. Like, it was never the idea, this is just everybody's going to have these. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's definitely weird things that have
explanations. Yeah, I'm right there with you with science. You know, I'm like, I'll always go with science, but there's also that part of me, like I love, there's this fantastic book called, I think it's called The Dancing Waylay Masters. And I think it was like one of those books from the 70s where it was like, I guess it's sort of like a horror convention where like with the horror people go in the same hotel as some other convention and they mix up. So it was like this convention where I think it was the scientists, like the physicists, were at the same convention as like the religious monks, and they were both getting drunk at the same bar. And they wrote this book about like all the physicists were like, yeah, science all the way, but science stops here. After this point, we don't know what the fuck. We can't even like talk about it. And the religious monks are like, yeah, God all the way. We're God all the way, but yeah, when we get here, like we can't explain God. And like they were just like getting drunk and talking about that place where both of their understanding, both of those understandings failed. And I guess unlike today's times, back in the 70s, they were able to peacefully meet in between there. Yeah. So I think that's where we're gonna leave it, in that place between science and God lies ghosts, and I think we're gonna call it on there. So stick around, Gwendolyn. Let's just wish we'll wish everyone a happy Saturday and a good night and a happy Women in Horror Month. We're gonna run the video, and we will hope to see you all soon. Hey, instead of cutting it off, we just we're back for just one more second. We just want to thank everyone again for coming. Gwendolyn, we had a question from the chat room. People just want to know, where is the best way to buy your stuff? Where can they find your work?
Amazon is fine. I mean, you can also go directly to the publishers pages. So for this one, it would be Broken Eye Books website, and then also for my other so that would be for that and Pretty Mary's, and then also Nightscape. The charitable chat book is only available on Amazon and ebook now. So yep.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for asking that out there in our comments. Again, thank you for everyone who stayed with us on this Saturday night. Yeah, you could find Underworld Dreams at the publisher, Leve Press. Support your independent bookstores. On my social media, I like to post a number of independent bookstores. You can find it, or of course, you can just get it on Amazon. And thank you to Gwendolyn for spending this time, for lending your help in celebrating the release of the audiobook, and for talking about ghosts and witches, and as someone, fish, feathers, and fur is what someone said in the comments there. So with that, we're really going to chime out and wish everyone a great night. Thank you.
Thanks.